Jonathan Hale, a man whose name carried weight in the world of finance, was known not only for his immense wealth, but also for his meticulous nature. Every detail of his life was scheduled, calculated, and planned down to the last minute. That was why his unexpected early return from a week-long business trip shocked even himself. His chauffeur drove him up the long, marble-paved driveway that led to his grand mansion. The sprawling house, with its tall glass windows and manicured gardens, was meant to be a symbol of order and perfection. Yet tonight, Jonathan had come back hours earlier than anyone expected. Without even alerting his staff, he wanted silence, solitude, and perhaps a glass of aged scotch before anyone noticed. But as soon as he stepped inside, briefcase in hand, a faint sound stopped him. It wasn't the usual hum of the air conditioning or the echo of his own footsteps on polished floors. It was softer, the sound of someone humming. Confused, Jonathan followed the sound through the wide hallway, passing the grand piano and the towering staircase. His brow furrowed when he realized the voice was coming from the living room. Slowly, he stepped closer, and what he saw froze him. The maid, a young woman named Isabella, dressed in her plain uniform, was standing in front of the large window. But she wasn't cleaning, dusting, or organizing. She was dancing. Barefoot, with a rag still clutched loosely in one hand, Isabella twirled gracefully across the marble floor, her movements fluid, almost balletic. Her humming rose into a soft melody, filling the empty halls with warmth Jonathan had never heard in his home before. He gripped the handle of his briefcase tighter, stunned. This was not what he had expected. The maid, the woman he barely noticed in the background of his grand life, was transforming his cold, lifeless living room into a stage of unexpected beauty. Jonathan should have coughed, should have announced his presence, but he couldn't. He stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching. For the first time in years, his perfectly controlled world felt shaken. And as Isabella spun with her eyes closed, unaware of his gaze, Jonathan realized with a shock. The house he thought he knew held secrets, and the greatest one was standing right before him. Jonathan did not announce himself. He stood at the threshold as the last note of Isabella's humming faded into the vast room and dissolved against glass and stone. She slowed, a final turn skimming the edge of the Persian rug, and came to rest with her hand on the window frame. The cloth dangled, forgotten from her fingers. He had built this house to silence every human sound. Double-pane glass, acoustic paneling behind the walls, a staircase that did not creak. Yet here was a melody that refused to be contained, a warmth pressing through the cold. His first instinct was irritation at the violation. His second was a reluctance to break whatever he had just witnessed. The hesitation cost him his invisibility. Isabella's reflection in the night-dark window found the silhouette behind her. She flinched and spun, the cloth snapping once in the air like a reprimand. "Mr. Hale." The words landed brisk and professional, betraying only a flick of embarrassment. "I didn't hear you come in." "You weren't meant to." His voice surprised him. It sounded rough, unused. He set the briefcase on a console table with more force than necessary. "You're off task. I finished the living room rotation. I was checking the window tracks." She lifted the rag, as if proof. It trembled minutely in her hand. "You were dancing," he said. A flush rose into her face, faint at first and then resolute, like a blush that refused to apologize. Yes, they stood in the residue of honesty. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a system clicked, recalibrating airflow, a mechanical heartbeat asserting order. Jonathan felt the old, comfortable authority marshal itself. Policies, expectations, the line printed in his employee handbook about conduct on premises. He almost reached for those words, the way a drowning man gropes for a rope. "What gave you the impression this was permitted?" he asked. "The house was empty," she said, "and the floor was dry." "That is not an answer. It's the truth." He disliked the way she met his gaze, steadily, without defiance but without retreat. Staff usually looked at his tie knot or his shoulder seam, anywhere but his eyes. Isabella looked as though she had come here to do a job and would not pretend that job included vanishing at his convenience. "How long have you been in my employment?" he asked. 4 months. In 4 months, no one told you this is inappropriate? I wasn't hired to be appropriate, Mr. Hale. I was hired to keep things clean. A mark appeared on the window where she had braced her fingers. She noticed it too late, winced, and reached automatically to buff it out. It was a small failure, the kind that should have given him ammunition. Instead, it pricked him with an absurd sympathy. Some part of him, a part buried under spreadsheets and client pitches and perfect quarterly forecasts, recognized the posture. People who could not afford mistakes learned to erase them mid-breath. "Tell me something," he said. "What were you humming?" "Bach, the cello suites." "You were humming Bach," he repeated, incredulous. "While checking the window tracks." She swallowed a smile that nearly surfaced. "Yes, the acoustics in this room make it forgiving." That word, forgiving, landed like a foreign coin in his palm. Nothing in this house had been designed to forgive. He moved nearer to the window and looked out. The lawn presented itself obediently, terraces gridded into submission, hedges cut to geometric obedience. Beyond the perimeter, the city glittered. He had chosen this elevation for its command of the skyline. Tonight the lights looked like other people's lives he could not touch. "Do you dance often, Miss—" He realized with a flicker of annoyance at himself that he did not remember her surname. "Marin," she supplied, "only when the room is empty." "Why?" "Because it keeps a person from feeling like a pair of hands." He turned to her at that. She didn't flinch. Her uniform betrayed nothing, neither poverty nor pride, merely function. He had never considered what it might cost a person to wear clothing designed to broadcast absence. He had never needed to. "Who hired you?" he asked. "The agency. Your house manager gave me the schedule." "Do you have references?" "Yes." "From where?" "Mostly restaurants. And a school." "A school?" "I taught music before the district cut the program." The word assembled a swift constellation in his mind. Grant budgets, layoffs, buildings with peeling paint, and cheerful posters masking scarcity. He imagined her in a classroom with a lightning bolt of a second-hand baton, coaxing sound out of kids whose mouths had learned silence. He dismissed the image as sentimental. Sentiment clouded judgment. It also gnawed at the edges of certainty, until the shape inside was not certainty at all. "You left teaching to clean my house?" he said. "I didn't leave." She folded the rag and unfolded it again. "I was made redundant. The headmaster called it restructuring. The students called it, now we don't have music." "You could have found another school." "There weren't positions, not with benefits." "And dance?" "Dance is for after hours," she said, "for when no one is looking." It should have ended there. He should have reminded her of protocol, docked her pay if he wished to make an example, and returned to his schedule. But the schedule had already cracked. Something else, quieter, older, insisted on being heard. "Show me," he said. She blinked. "Show you? You said the acoustics are forgiving. Show me what you meant." "I am employed as a cleaner." "Tonight, you are employed as someone who knows something I do not," he answered. "Indulge my ignorance." It was a poor attempt at lightness. Still, it steadied them both. She hesitated, weighing outcomes. The house recorded everything. He could crush her with evidence. He watched the calculation pass across her features and marveled with a glancing shame at how thoroughly fear shaped other people's choices around him. "All right," she said. She crossed to the built-in sound controls, and only then, remembering she had no access to the server, stopped. He was beside her before she could withdraw. "What do you want?" he asked. "Silence is fine." He stepped back. She returned to the open expanse of floor at the room's center and stood very still. The stillness sharpened the space around her like a lens focusing. When she moved, it was with a deliberation that insulted nothing. The angles of furniture, the line of the rug, even the severe verticals of the window mullions were not obstacles, but partners. She did not perform. She conversed, with gravity, with balance, with breath. Her bare feet, smudged faintly with cleaner, traced something between a fugue and a prayer. Jonathan did not notice when his hand found the back of a chair and grasped it, as though some current ran through the room and required grounding. He had sat through operas in Vienna, ballets in Paris, private recitals in salons where the cheapest wine exceeded a concierge's annual salary. None of those had felt like this. Those evenings had flattered him. This one implicated him. When she finished, there was no practiced flourish. She simply stood again, chest lifting once, and the room settled around her like a cloak. "Thank you," he said. The words were small, insufficient. They were also the only ones that did not lie. She nodded. "I'll return to the schedule." "Wait." He heard the word and recognized himself in it. A man who did not yet know what he wanted, only that the next ordinary moment would not answer it. He walked to the window and tapped the faint outline of her fingertips on the glass. "You missed a print," he said gently, and immediately regretted the pettiness. But she was already there, rag in hand, buffing the mark away. "How long," he asked, watching the ghostly smudge disappear, "would it take to fix the studio?" "What studio?" "The room above the garage," he said. "When I bought the property, it was a dance studio. Mirrors, bars, sprung floor. I turned it into storage. Over time, I turned everything into storage." Her mouth quirked. "I'll need a ladder and a key." "You'll have both." She studied him then, weighing, perhaps, whether he meant it. "Why do you care?" He disliked that he did not have a quick answer, no calculus of return on investment, no suave rhetoric about community outreach. He glanced at the black glass, saw his own reflection superimposed over the city, tie slightly askew, jaw set in default resistance, and saw a man who had optimized himself into a stranger. "Because this house is immaculate," he said, "and still something in it feels broken. I thought it was the staff. Maybe it's the owner." The corner of her mouth lifted again. "That is outside my job description." "Then consider it a request, not an order. Requests involve time. I can pay for time." "There are things you can't buy with salary, Mr. Hale." He surprised them both. "Then I'll learn to earn them." Footsteps crossed the far corridor, measured, competent. His house manager, Ms. Dwyer, appeared in the doorway and halted, startled to find her employer home and his employee in candid conversation. "Sir," she said, recovering at once, "your car was not expected until morning. Should I have the kitchen prepare dinner?" "No," he said, still looking at Isabella. "But tomorrow, please clear the space above the garage. I want it restored to its original purpose." Miss Dwyer's eyebrows flicked just once, before her tone reasserted the neutral efficiency he paid her for. "Of course." "And Miss Marin," he added, "adjust her rotation. Allocate 2 hours, 3 evenings a week, to the studio. Put it under maintenance." "Maintenance," Miss Dwyer repeated. He held Isabella's gaze. "Yes, the kind that keeps a person from becoming only a pair of hands." Miss Dwyer inclined her head and withdrew, her steps echoing away. The house inhaled and exhaled. "You just gave yourself a problem," Isabella said quietly. "What problem?" "People don't like it when you decide rooms are meant for living." "They will manage," he said, "or they will find another house to manage." He picked up his briefcase and paused, suddenly aware of exhaustion settling into his bones, the kind that came from resisting gravity for years. "Good night, Miss Marin." "Good night, Mr. Hale." He took 3 steps and then stopped. "One more thing," he said without turning. "The next time you need music, Don't hum. Use the piano. I don't have your codes. I'm not talking about the system. He gestured toward the grand piano near the staircase, an instrument bought for show, polished by professionals, and never touched. Keys don't require passwords. He left her with that and climbed the stairs. Halfway up, he heard it. The bench sliding softly, the lid lifting, a pause like a held breath. Then, tentative at first, and then sure, the room filled with the opening measures of Bach. He did not turn back. He stood, eyes closed, listening as the house he'd built to smother sound remembered reluctantly how to carry it. Downstairs, Isabella played in the reflection of her own ghost in the window and understood the risk she had just accepted. Upstairs, Jonathan unknotted his tie, sat on the edge of a bed that had never felt like a place to rest, and understood the greater risk, that a melody had found the fracture in his glass and would not leave until it widened. In the morning, the city would look the same. Contracts would wait for his signature. The markets would open with the same hungry precision. But tonight, in the house on the hill, a piano insisted on saying what neither employer nor employee could afford to say yet. And far beneath the polished floors, something old shifted, as if the foundation itself had decided to listen. The next morning, Jonathan Hale's mansion awakened like a clockwork organism. Lights brightened in sequence, the kitchen hissed with steam, the gardeners trimmed borders to the exact millimeter. Jonathan followed his routine with the precision that had once made him wealthy. Shower at 6, espresso at 6:15, emails before the markets opened. He should have felt restored by order. Instead, the echoes of Bach on the piano still threaded through his head. By the time he descended for breakfast, Isabella had already vanished from the public rooms. Ms. Dwyer reported she was handling the upper hallways. Jonathan nodded, concealing relief. He told himself he wanted to check her work. In truth, he wanted to confirm last night had not been some fever dream. When he reached the second floor, he found her kneeling on the polished parquet, a bucket at her side. She rose immediately when she noticed him. This time she did not flinch or flush. She merely waited. "Miss Marin," he said. "Mr. Hale." He gestured toward the corridor of guest suites. "Keys to these." She lifted the ring at her hip. "Housekeeping access. For maintenance." His gaze slid past her to a door at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, its brass knob dulled from disuse. He hadn't entered that room in years. Not since he closed it after his wife's departure. He didn't even remember authorizing staff access. "Does that key open the West Suite?" he asked. "Yes," she said carefully. "It was on the schedule this month. Airing and dusting." The words landed like a splinter. He had sealed the West Suite precisely to prevent intrusion. The room was his one concession to memory, a chamber where dust itself was a guard. Yet here she was, speaking of it as routine. "Show me," he said. Her hesitation was not fear, but caution. Then she rose, took the key, and led him down the hall. The air grew cooler. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. Dust motes swirled like faint constellations. Sunlight angled through shutters half-closed, painting stripes across an untouched bed, a desk, and a small upright piano in the corner. The scent was faintly of cedar and lavender, his late wife's preference. Time had preserved everything, and someone had disturbed it. On the piano sat a folded sheet of music, not just any music, his wife's handwriting, curved, elegant, scrawled in the margins. But the dust had been brushed away, the keys wiped clean. Someone had touched what he thought no one dared to touch. Jonathan's voice sharpened. "Did you move this?" "No," Isabella said. "It was already on the stand. I only dusted around it." "You played." Her eyes widened. "No, not here. Last night downstairs." He stepped closer, staring at the score. The room pressed against his ribs, compressing breath. "This piece," he said. "She played this for me when we first bought the house." "It's a simple prelude," Isabella said softly. "It calms the air." Something in her tone, gentle, matter-of-fact, cut through his anger. She had not exploited the relic. She had protected it, cleaned it with reverence. Still, the unease remained. How had she known the piece? How had she known his wife's music? He turned sharply. "Who gave you permission to open this room?" "The schedule. Miss Dwyer said it was overdue." "I'll speak with her." "Mr. Hale," Isabella said quietly, "sometimes rooms don't need to stay locked forever." Her words stung, not for insolence, but for their truth. He gripped the doorframe, then released it with deliberate care. "Finish your work," he said. "I'll be in my study." As he walked away, he felt the fracture widen. A maid had seen more of his house, and perhaps of his life than he intended. And now the house itself seemed complicit, handing her keys he had sworn never to give. Down the hall, Isabella lingered a moment by the upright piano. She traced the edge of the music sheet, but did not touch the keys. The man upstairs thought he had caught her dancing. He did not know that what she carried into this house was not a secret hobby. It was survival, and now, by accident or fate, it was a secret that belonged to them both. Jonathan Hale prided himself on due diligence. He could read a balance sheet the way a conductor reads a score, every dissonance, every missing note, every hidden crescendo. By noon he had decided, if the house had handed a stranger a key to the past, he would learn who, exactly, had accepted it. He started with the mundane. In his study, he opened the household HR portal on his laptop, a system he rarely touched because people were, for him, the inefficiencies between decisions. Isabella Marin, hired 3 months ago by Dwyer Staffing, assigned to Hale House as a floating attendant. Background check cleared, ID verified. References: 2 supervisors from event venues, a cafe owner who confirmed receivable shifts. Everything was clean, perhaps too clean. Jonathan called Miss Dwyer. She answered on the second ring, voice clipped, eternally composed. "Mr. Hale, is there an issue?" "Not yet," he said. "Tell me about Miss Marin." "A reliable addition, quiet, hard-working, no complaints." "I need more than adjectives." "How did she land here? This house is not open to agency roulette." There was the faintest pause. "We had a cancellation the day your wing required deep dusting. She volunteered for extra hours. She's competent, respectful. She has a key to the West Suite. The maintenance set grants pass-through for scheduled rooms. It was due this quarter." "It wasn't due to me," he said. "From now on, I sign off before any closed room is entered." "Understood." He ended the call and stared at the screen until his reflection blurred. Competent, respectful. The words felt like cardboard placed over a window. Something about last night's music, the lightness of her hands, the way she had stood her ground without defiance. It did not match the file. He ran a quiet search. He wasn't proud of it, and he wasn't ashamed. He had built his fortune by asking the question underneath the question. He checked public records, court logs, professional licenses. The name Isabella Marin returned a scattering of noise. Another woman in Miami, a florist in Fresno. Nothing that tethered to Los Angeles beyond a leasing application for a modest apartment in a neighborhood with early morning leaf blowers and late-night arguments. He leaned back. If the official trail gave him air, he would look for weight, what people leave behind when they move through rooms they don't own. He left the study, crossed the hall, and found the small service corridor that staff used between the main kitchen and laundry. The smell of starch and lemon oil cloaked the walls. Near the back door stood 2 grey lockers with padlocks, Marin and Lopez stenciled on tape. He shouldn't. He did. "Mr. Hale?" The voice was soft, a warning bell without malice. Julio, the grounds foreman, stood in the doorway with his cap in 2 hands, 60 and sun-browned, the property's quiet metronome. "You need something, sir?" Julio asked. "I'm checking safety compliance," Jonathan lied, then softened. "Julio, how long have you worked with Miss Marin?" "Since she came. Good worker, doesn't gossip, knows how to listen without taking." Taking what? More than you give, Julio said simply. Jonathan nodded. Thank you. Julio didn't move. Sir, he added, eyes steady, once I had to choose between a fence line drawn on a map and the way the land actually runs. The map looked right. The water said otherwise. If you want something to stand, follow the water. When Julio left, the hallway felt smaller. Jonathan had spent 20 years trusting maps because maps were measurable. The older man's metaphor lodged like a splinter. He didn't open the locker. Instead, he went looking for the water. Downstairs, mid-afternoon sunlight limned the edges of the kitchen island. Isabella stood at the sink, rinsing a vase whose mouth had stained with green from old stems. Miss Dwyer stacked labelled containers in a pantry, pretending not to keep watch. Jonathan considered retreat. He approached. Miss Marin, he said. She turned off the tap and dried her hands on a cloth, more ritual than necessity. Yes, Mr. Hale. When housekeeping enters the West Suite, you will alert me first. That room has personal history. I will, she said. No defensiveness, no apology, just agreement. He should have left it there. The prelude, he added, hating the way the question felt like exposure. Where did you learn it? My mother taught me the skeleton of it. A faint smile, private as a closed book. Bach is a good spine when the day sags. He looked at the vase in her hands. Your records say cafe, events, housekeeping, not conservatory. I didn't say conservatory. Then where? The back of a bakery after closing, she said. And the places that have pianos they don't use. Churches on Tuesdays, friends' living rooms when they were tired of silence. You sound like you've had a series of lives. Everyone does, she said. Some people just don't admit it. A hairline crack opened in his certainty. He pivoted. Did you move the music in the West Suite? No, she said, but I wiped dust from the keys. Dust chokes motion. I thought if you ever wanted the room to breathe, that would help. He thanked her. The words came out quieter than he intended. He retreated to his study with an irritation he recognized, that restless itch of something not quite adding up, not because someone was lying, but because the truth was larger than the space he'd given it. On his desk, his phone vibrated, a calendar reminder he had set and forgotten. 6 months since the letter from the family court stopped arriving because there was no new address to forward to. He dismissed the alert, stood abruptly, and went to the West Suite. He opened the shutters. The room inhaled. He crossed to the upright and sat on the bench. The keys were indeed clean. He placed his hands on middle C and let them fall into the prelude his wife had loved, the right hand stepping, left hand anchoring, a river of small inevitabilities. His technique was unpracticed, but the house seemed to exhale around him, a soft settling of beams. Halfway through, a floorboard creaked. He glanced over his shoulder. The doorway was empty. He finished, closed the fallboard, and, impulse-tugging, slid open the bench seat. Sheet music, a broken metronome, a narrow cloth roll. He unrolled it. Inside rested a thin, spine-creased notebook. Not his wife's. Cheap paper, ring-bound, smudged, the first pages filled with tidy exercises. The later pages changed. Lines turned into notes, notes into phrases, phrases into instructions. If the left hand wants to rush, breathe on 4. When the person listening can't sleep, play softer, like sunlight under a door. He frowned. In the back, a name written once and crossed out, then written again darker. I, Marine. He wasn't angry. He was startled by the odd courtesy of it, by the way the notebook hid where someone would find it only if they played. She had practiced here, or simply left a thing she could not carry all day to every building that would not claim her. He returned the roll, closed the bench, and carried his questions back to his study. At 6, the gate buzzer crackled, a visitor without an appointment. Dwyer's voice on the intercom. Sir, there's a Miss Morales here. She says it's regarding payroll. She won't leave papers. She says it's personal. He almost said no. He said yes. A woman entered with a plain satchel and a spine that had learned to hold itself, despite heaviness. She introduced herself as the cafe owner who had signed Isabella's reference. "I wouldn't normally bother you, Mr. Hale," she said, stationery in her hands. "But Bella won't take help, and the way things line up, she'll be gone before the month ends." "Gone?" "Her landlord is selling. She's month to month. The new lease doubles rent. She won't outbid his son. She won't move far because she visits someone nights." "Visits who?" The woman hesitated. "Her brother, county hospital, dialysis. Their mother died last year. He has no one else. She doesn't tell employers because employers don't like complications." A blunt, unpretty picture. Jonathan felt the house tilt a degree. "Why are you telling me?" "Because she won't," Ms. Morales said. "She will show up early, clean, play your old piano when the air in her chest gets too tight, and leave before anyone asks a question." He asked for the hospital's name. She slipped him a card. "Don't tell her I came. It will embarrass her. But if this place has any mercy to spare, now would be the time." After she left, Jonathan sat a while without moving. The notebook in the bench, the midnight prelude, the way Isabella stood unafraid before his scrutiny, none of it felt like performance. It felt like someone carrying too much with both hands and refusing to drop any of it, because dropping even one would feel like surrender. He went to the kitchen. Isabella was polishing the glass on the back door, the last task before clock-out. "Ms. Marin," he said, "I may have overstepped this afternoon. If the notebook in the bench is yours, I'll keep my curiosity to myself." Her eyes flickered. Surprise, then a straightening. "It's just scales and reminders. I didn't mean to trespass on what's not mine." "Maybe it is yours," he said carefully. "Maybe the rooms we think are sealed aren't meant to stay that way forever." She studied him. "Is this about the room or something else?" "Both," he said, to his own shock, telling the truth. "Then let me be clear," she replied. "I don't want anything from this house that isn't work. I don't want pity. I don't want to be a story. I want to keep my head down and make a place clean enough that a person can breathe." He nodded. "Understood." She reached for the switch to the mudroom light. He stopped her with a question that felt like stepping off a map. "Do you need a ride tonight?" A beat. "No." "Would you accept one if it meant you'd be there 10 minutes earlier?" Her gaze held his, weighing subtext. "Mr. Hale, I can take care of myself." "I don't doubt it," he said. "I'm learning to ask different questions." The corners of her mouth moved, almost a smile, not quite. "Tomorrow then," she said. "There's brass on the staircase that wants a war." When she left, he waited a minute, then picked up his keys. He told no one. He drove to County Medical, parked in a far corner, and sat in the dim with the windows cracked, listening to nurses' shoes whisper across concrete and families murmur under sodium lamps. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. He had found the water. On the passenger seat, his phone lit with an email from legal about a bidding war he was supposed to be winning. He closed the notification. In the hospital glass, his reflection looked like a man who had built rooms too strong for sunlight. He started the car and headed home, the prelude unspooling in his head, each measure a step toward a door he had never thought to open. Tomorrow would come with questions. For once, he intended to ask the right ones. The following morning, Jonathan arrived at his downtown office earlier than his assistants. The skyline was still grey, glass towers yawning awake. He had intended to bury himself in contracts, but instead the hospital card Ms. Morales had given him lay on top of his leather folio, stubborn as a bruise. He slid it under a stack of reports and tried to focus. Numbers stared back at him. Forecasts, audits, dividend schedules. Yet behind the columns, he saw Isabella wiping piano keys with reverent hands, her gaze steady as if she knew how fragile people could be when no one was looking. A knock on the glass wall pulled him out of thought. His chief financial officer, Darrow, stepped in, tie already askew from his morning commute. "You're distracted," Darrow observed. "Not by anything relevant to you," Jonathan replied. "That's what worries me." Darrow set a folder on the desk. "We have an acquisition closing this quarter. Investors smell hesitation. They will eat you alive if you start blinking." Jonathan flicked through the file mechanically. "Have legal prepare a statement. I'll approve it later." Darrow narrowed his eyes. "What is it? Another audit? Family trouble?" Jonathan said nothing. Darrow had worked under him for 15 years, and knew silence meant the wall was up. With a resigned shrug, he left. Jonathan leaned back, restless. Control had always been his fortress. Now the fortress felt like a cell. That evening, he returned home to find the house unsettled. Staff whispered at the edge of the corridor, glancing at him before vanishing into wings like startled birds. He found Isabella in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, polishing silver. "Why is the household skittish?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "Because Ms. Dwyer said you've been making unusual requests." "What kind of unusual?" "Rooms reopened, hours reassigned, and last night, music." Her tone was not mocking, simply factual. "Does it bother you?" he asked. Her cloth stilled over the fork she held. "It worries them more than me. Change means mistakes. Mistakes mean replacements." He watched her set the fork down gently as though sparing it from punishment. "You speak like someone who's been replaced before." She smiled faintly without mirth. "Haven't we all?" Later, he went to the West Suite again. The upright piano sat quiet. He lifted the bench lid. This time the notebook was gone. A flicker of disappointment surprised him. It wasn't intrusion that stung, but absence. He closed the bench and turned. At the doorway, Isabella stood, holding the notebook in both hands. "You left it," he said. "I realized it wasn't safe here," she replied. "Safe from what? From people who don't understand why it exists." She hugged it close, protective. The gesture was intimate, almost defiant. "You think I don't understand?" "I think you understand too much." Jonathan studied her, words assembling, then falling apart before they left his mouth. For years, every conversation had been transaction. With her, silence felt more dangerous than speech. "Isabella," he said slowly, "I know about your brother." Her grip tightened on the notebook. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. A friend who cares." Her eyes flickered, anger, fear, then resignation. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity. It's information. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because people with power don't hire burdens." The words landed like a stone. He had built an empire on efficiency, on cutting what slowed the machine. Now the truth was standing in front of him, breathing. He exhaled. "Then let me be clear. I don't intend to dismiss you. I intend to understand." She looked at him, suspicion warring with exhaustion. Then she shook her head. "Understanding doesn't pay hospital bills." "Maybe not. But it might keep you from carrying them alone." For a long moment neither spoke. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Finally she said, "If you really want to understand, don't ask about me. Ask yourself why a house this large needs to be so quiet." She left, notebook pressed to her chest, leaving Jonathan in the half-lit room with a question echoing louder than the silence ever had. The staff at Hale House had always operated like gears in a clock, each rotation precise, predictable, interchangeable. But gears resist when the mechanism changes, and by midweek, Jonathan sensed the resistance sharpening. At breakfast, his coffee arrived lukewarm. At dinner, the wine he preferred was mysteriously out of stock. Hallways that once echoed with invisible service now carried whispers that stopped when he entered. Jonathan was not a man who noticed staff unless something malfunctioned. Now he felt their disapproval pressing in like humidity. He confronted Ms. Dwyer in the library. She stood with her clipboard, immaculate as always. "You've lost control of the staff," he said. Her chin lifted slightly. On the contrary, sir, they are unsettled because they do not understand your adjustments. Adjustments? Closing wings, reopening others, reassigning rotations, allowing a maid to sit at the grand piano. These are not the precedents we've kept. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. And who decides those precedents? Tradition, sir. Order. Tradition built these walls. Order suffocates them. Dwyer's expression didn't flicker. Staff thrive on predictability. If they fear one boundary will fall, they fear the rest will too. He almost dismissed her, but something in her words stuck. Fear of one boundary collapsing into another. That was exactly what was happening to him. That evening he entered the West Suite and found the upright piano lid raised. Isabella sat at the bench, not playing, simply resting her fingers on the keys as though listening to their weight. She looked up when he entered. "They're angry," she said. "I noticed. You changed the rules of the house. Rules keep them safe." "And you?" he asked. "Do the rules keep you safe?" Her lips pressed together. "I've lived my whole life under rules that weren't mine. Safety and silence are not the same." He sat in the armchair by the window, a seat he hadn't used since his wife left. "Tell me what silence cost you." She hesitated. Then, carefully, "My brother and I grew up in apartments where walls were thin and tempers thinner. I learned to be quiet, so neighbors wouldn't complain, so men wouldn't notice, so teachers wouldn't ask questions. Quiet got us through. But it also meant no one knew when I needed help. By the time I learned to ask, I'd already lost more than I care to say." Her words settled between them like dust in sunlight, visible, undeniable. "You think I don't understand loss," Jonathan said. "This house is full of it." Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "Then maybe that's why you built it to echo, so the silence would be louder than the grief." He looked away, unsettled by the precision of her observation. The next morning, Darrow stormed into his office with news that shook harder than staff whispers. "Jonathan, the board is restless. They think you're distracted." "Distracted? You left negotiations early. You've cancelled 3 dinners with investors. You've been seen leaving County Hospital at night." Jonathan's head snapped up. "Who saw me?" "People see what they want to see," Darrow said, voice taut. "They're asking questions about a maid. If you want to play benefactor, fine, but don't expect shareholders to approve when your reputation slips into gossip." The word maid carried the sneer of dismissal. Jonathan felt the old reflex: defend, deny, control. Instead he said evenly, "Perhaps they should stop underestimating people who do not wear the right suit." Darrow stared, baffled. "You've built your life on being untouchable. Don't start bleeding now." When he left, Jonathan remained still. He had faced lawsuits, hostile takeovers, the collapse of markets. But he had never faced the possibility that his downfall could begin with the simple act of listening to someone who wasn't meant to be heard. That night, he returned home late. Isabella was leaving through the back door, coat thin against the chill. "Wait," he said. She turned, surprised. "You're home. I heard about your landlord." Her shoulders stiffened. "That's not your concern." "It is, if you vanish without a trace." Her eyes darkened. "Mr. Hale, if you're asking me to trade my dignity for charity, I won't. I've been invisible long enough without selling what little self I have left." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not asking you to sell anything. I'm asking you not to carry every weight alone." For the first time since he'd known her, she looked tired, truly tired. "Then answer me this, Mr. Hale. When the house turns on me, when whispers become knives, will you still be standing where you are now? Or will you decide silence is easier?" He had no answer. She left into the night, the door closing soft as a verdict. Jonathan stood in the empty kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator louder than his own pulse. For years, silence had been his shield. Now it sounded like betrayal. He realized then The house wasn't only pushing back against her, it was testing him. The gala had been planned months in advance, a celebration of Hale Enterprises' newest acquisition. Jonathan rarely enjoyed such events, but attendance was mandatory for investors and allies. This time, though, the evening carried a current of unease. The whispers had already begun, the billionaire distracted, a maid at the center of rumor, cracks spreading through the marble facade. The ballroom glittered under chandeliers, tables set with crystal, champagne flowing like a river designed to drown doubt. Jonathan arrived in a tailored suit, but even his precision could not silence the murmurs. Across the room, Darrow intercepted him. "For God's sake, Jonathan, keep it clean tonight. No strays, no speculation. One wrong look and the vultures will circle." Jonathan ignored him, scanning the crowd. He hadn't expected to see her, yet there she was, Isabella. She had been reassigned from household duties to assist with catering. A crisp white uniform replaced her usual work clothes, but the modest cut could not disguise the unease in her eyes. She moved between tables with practiced invisibility, carrying trays while investors laughed and toasted. For a moment, Jonathan considered shielding her, pretending not to notice, but his gaze lingered too long, and the crowd noticed. It began with a single voice, a woman in an emerald gown, wife of a major shareholder. "Isn't that her?" she whispered, just loud enough to carry. "The one he keeps after hours." A ripple spread, smiles tightened, eyes sharpened. Laughter twisted into smirks. Isabella froze at a table, tray balanced perfectly, though her knuckles whitened. A guest, one of the younger executives eager to score points, leaned forward. "Tell us, Miss... what was it? Marin. What's the secret to keeping the master of the house entertained after dark?" A few chuckles, too sharp to be friendly. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "That's enough." But the damage was done. All eyes were on her. Another voice chimed in, a man with silver hair and too much wine in his veins. "We've heard she plays piano, Jonathan. Perhaps she should entertain us now. Or does she save her music for private audiences?" The laughter rose, feeding on itself. Isabella stood rooted, eyes fixed on the tray in her hands. For years she had trained herself to be invisible, but tonight invisibility had turned into spectacle. Jonathan stepped forward, but she moved first. Slowly, deliberately, she set the tray on the nearest table. Then she straightened, shoulders squared, gaze steady. "My work," she said quietly, yet the words carried, "is to serve this evening with dignity. If you want entertainment, you have a full orchestra waiting to play. I will not be your joke." The room stilled. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others smiled cruelly, disappointed their game had ended. Jonathan felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he was not the one defending his fortress. She had done it herself, with nothing but words and a spine no ridicule could bend. Darrow hissed at his side. "Control it, Jonathan. You can't let her—" Jonathan cut him off. "Enough." He crossed the floor, ignoring the murmurs, and addressed Isabella directly. "You don't have to stay here." Her eyes met his, steady, despite the humiliation burning around her. "If I leave now, they win." He understood. Still, the choice tore at him. Protect her, or let her stand. In the end, she stood. She picked up the tray again, resumed her work as if nothing had happened, but Jonathan saw the tightness in her jaw, the glassy shine at the edges of her eyes. The gala continued. Deals were toasted, cameras flashed, speeches filled the air. But for Jonathan, the evening was already ruined. The empire he had built on respect and fear had allowed this, his staff, his peers, his allies, to humiliate a woman who had done nothing but remind him what humanity sounded like. When the night ended, he found her near the service exit, coat in hand. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "Because I've left too many times in my life," she replied softly. "Running only teaches them they can push harder." He wanted to promise protection, to erase the humiliation, But promises from men like him had broken her world before. Instead, he said the only thing he could, "I'm sorry." She looked at him, eyes shining but unbroken. "Don't be sorry. Be different." Then she walked into the night, leaving Jonathan with the weight of a truth no empire could purchase. Dignity, once mocked, only grows stronger when it refuses to bend. The morning after the gala, headlines hit like hammers. Billionaire distracted by Maid rumors at Hale Gala. Shareholders whisper as Hale's private life overshadows deal. The tabloids sharpened their knives, while financial papers asked quieter but more dangerous questions. Was Jonathan Hale losing control? Jonathan sat in his study, papers scattered across the desk. He had faced hostile takeovers and survived, but this storm was different. It wasn't about numbers or contracts. It was about perception, and perception could rot faster than any balance sheet. Ms. Dwyer appeared at the door, clipboard in hand, her face a mask of restrained fury. "You must dismiss her," she said flatly. "No. Mr. Hale, the staff saw it. The investors heard it. She humiliated this house." Jonathan rose, his voice sharp. "She did not humiliate this house. This house humiliated her." Dwyer's eyes narrowed. "Then you choose scandal over order. Perhaps order needs to be broken." She left without another word, but the silence she carried was heavier than argument. By midday, Darrow stormed into his office downtown. "We're bleeding confidence. The board wants reassurance." "Then reassure them. They want to hear it from you, tonight. We're arranging a statement. You will say the rumors are baseless. You will say she is gone." Jonathan's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "And if I don't, then you risk your position. They'll call an emergency vote. Jonathan, you know how fast loyalty evaporates." For a long moment, Jonathan said nothing. Finally, he replied, "Draft whatever statement you like. I'll write my own." Darrow stared. "You're throwing away decades of untouchable reputation. For her?" "No," Jonathan said quietly. "For myself, because untouchable isn't the same as respectable." That evening, the board gathered in the marble hall, their voices sharp with self-preservation. Cameras waited outside. Jonathan entered with the same calm he used to negotiate billion-dollar deals, but his pulse drummed in his throat. Darrow handed him the prepared statement. He tore it in half. "I'll speak my own words," he said. The board bristled. Flashbulbs exploded as Jonathan stepped up to the podium. "Last night," he began, his voice steady, "someone who works under my roof was ridiculed. A woman dismissed because she wears a uniform rather than a gown. Many of you laughed, many of you whispered, and I stood by longer than I should have." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Jonathan continued, "Let me be clear. Isabella Marin is not a scandal. She is not entertainment. She is a human being with dignity, and this house will respect her as such. If that costs me investors who prefer cruelty over character, so be it. If it costs me power built on silence, I accept that, but I will not build wealth on humiliation." For a moment, stunned silence. Then a surge of voices, angry, incredulous, fearful. Darrow's face burned crimson. Dwyer looked as though the marble floor had cracked. Jonathan stepped down before anyone could stop him. Outside, reporters screamed questions. He ignored them all. Back at the mansion, Isabella was in the kitchen, folding towels into neat stacks. She looked up when he entered. "They'll fire you," she said. "Maybe." "Why?" "Because they wanted me to silence you, and I didn't." She shook her head slowly. "You don't owe me that." "I don't," he admitted. "But I owe myself the truth. And the truth is, last night I saw who actually had strength in that room. It wasn't them, and it wasn't me. It was you." Her hands trembled slightly over the towel, but her gaze was firm. "Strength doesn't pay bills, Mr. Hale. It doesn't protect anyone from consequences." "No," he said softly, "but it changes what consequences mean." For the first time, Her expression cracked into something fragile, hope or maybe fear of it. Later, alone in his study, Jonathan read the first wave of commentary. Investors furious, media divided. Some called him reckless, others brave. He closed the laptop. For once, he didn't care. Because for the first time in years, his house was no longer silent. And in that noise, in the whispers, in the defiance, in the truth, there was life. The boardroom had never felt hostile to Jonathan before. He had built this empire brick by brick, every deal, every acquisition a stone in his fortress. But now, as he sat at the long mahogany table, he could feel the weight of eyes sharpened into knives. Darrow opened the session with clipped efficiency. "Gentlemen, we are here to discuss a matter of reputation and stability. Mr. Hale has exposed us to ridicule. Investors demand accountability. A vote is required." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, calm mask fixed, though his heart pounded. "Let's not pretend. You're not voting on stability. You're voting on whether integrity still belongs in this company." One of the older board members cleared his throat. "We're voting on whether a billionaire should risk us all for a maid." The word hung in the air like an insult, too sharp to soften. Jonathan's voice cut through the murmurs. "Her name is Isabella, and she has shown more dignity in humiliation than most of you in power." The room erupted in protest. Darrow slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! The motion stands. Vote now." Hands raised. One by one, tallies marked. Out of 12 seats, 7 voted for his removal. The verdict: Jonathan Hale would be stripped of his role as CEO. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and faced them with quiet steel. "You may take the title, but remember this. You didn't save the company tonight. You sold it. To fear, to cruelty, to silence. And fear never pays dividends for long." Without another word, he left the boardroom. Back at the mansion, Isabella was packing. A small suitcase sat open on the bed in her quarters. Jonathan stood at the doorway, watching her fold her few dresses with the efficiency of someone who had moved too many times. "You're leaving," he said. Her hands stilled. "It's the only way. If I stay, I'll ruin everything you have left." "I lost everything because I stayed silent too long, not because of you." She looked up, eyes tired but steady. "I don't want to be the reason you lose more." He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "Isabella, listen to me. They can take my position, my title, my wealth, but they cannot take the truth. And the truth is, I don't regret a single word I said last night, because for the first time in years, I didn't lie to myself." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I've lived invisible so long, I don't know what to do when someone sees me, really sees me, then start by staying." She shook her head, torn. "And if the world never forgives us, then we'll forgive each other." For a moment, silence wrapped them both, fragile but not empty. The next day, news broke of the board's decision. Media outlets devoured it. Hale ousted in stunning vote. Scandal claims a titan. Some celebrated his fall. Others questioned the board's motives. For the first time, voices rose in defense of Isabella. Ordinary employees wrote anonymously online about her kindness, her strength, her quiet dignity at the gala. What had been rumor became symbol. Jonathan read every word, not because they vindicated him, but because they proved what Isabella had said. Silence wasn't safety, only emptiness. That night he found her in the West Suite, standing by the piano. She touched the keys but didn't play. "They'll destroy you," she whispered. "Then let them try." "And what if you can't rebuild?" He reached out, covering her hand with his. "I don't want to rebuild what I had. I want to build something worth keeping." Her breath caught. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise. Inside, Jonathan Hale stood on the ruins of his empire, and for the first time he felt alive. 2 weeks had passed since the vote. Hale Enterprises carried on without Jonathan, though the press still lingered like scavengers. Investors pushed new leadership into place. The empire survived, but it no longer belonged to him. Jonathan remained in the mansion, stripped of power yet strangely unburdened. For the first time in years, he woke without schedules, clawing at his throat. He took breakfast in the garden instead of in silence at the mahogany table. He walked through rooms he had avoided for years, opening curtains long sealed. Light crept in where shadows once reigned, but one shadow lingered. Isabella. She still worked in the house, though less as an employee and more as something unnamed. Some nights Jonathan found her at the piano, fingers coaxing out melodies half-remembered. Other nights she disappeared to the hospital, returning with exhaustion etched into her face. He gave her space, but the distance was heavier than silence. One evening he found her on the balcony overlooking the city. Her suitcase was there again, packed. "You're leaving," he said quietly. She turned, wind tugging her hair. "I can't stay forever. I'm not part of your world." "My world." He gestured toward the skyline. "That world is gone. What remains is this house and the people in it, which means you." Her eyes glistened. "I don't want to be your cause. I don't want to be the symbol of your redemption." Jonathan stepped closer, voice steady. "You're not a symbol. You're a person. The only person who had the courage to look at me and see what I was hiding. You changed me, Isabella, and I don't want to lose that." Tears slid down her cheek. "And what if I fail you? Then we fail together. But at least it will be honest." The following week, Jonathan attended the hospital quietly, without cameras. He paid the bills for Isabella's brother, not as charity, but as promise. When she discovered it, she confronted him in the West Suite. "I told you I didn't want charity." "And it isn't," he said. "It's what you would have done for him if you had the means. Now you do, through me." She studied him, torn between anger and gratitude. Finally she whispered, "You're not the man I thought you were." He smiled faintly. "Neither am I." Meanwhile, Hale Enterprises began to crumble. Without Jonathan's steel, Darrow overreached. Deals soured. Shareholders turned restless. In whispered corners, regret began to brew. Jonathan watched from afar, no longer with bitterness, but with strange relief. His empire had always been too heavy for one man to carry. One afternoon, he returned home to find Isabella teaching his staff's children in the ballroom. Laughter rang where silence had ruled. She had turned the cavernous space into a classroom. Music sheets spread, pencils scratching, voices rising in song. Jonathan stood unseen at the doorway, the sound filling him with something wealth had never bought: life. When she noticed him, she blushed. "I thought the room was wasted. The children needed somewhere safe." He shook his head. "No, the room was waiting for you." Months later, on a spring morning, Jonathan walked through the garden and found Isabella planting roses by the fountain. Her uniform was gone, replaced by a simple dress dusted with soil. She looked up, smiling. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The company?" "Yes," he considered. "I miss the illusion of control, but not the emptiness." She patted the soil around the rosebush. "Sometimes losing what we built gives space for what we need." He watched her hands, steady and unafraid. "And sometimes what we need is right in front of us." She met his gaze, no longer shy, no longer invisible. In that moment, the house no longer felt like a fortress, it felt like a home. The world moved on. Hale Enterprises found a new master, one who valued profit above people. The tabloids found fresher scandals. But within the once silent mansion, laughter returned, music returned, and so did dignity. Jonathan Hale, once a billionaire defined by power, learned the final lesson. Empires fall, but love, humble, stubborn, and human, remains. and Isabella, once mocked as invisible, discovered that sometimes the greatest justice is not in humiliating those who scorned you, but in living a life they can never corrupt. Together they stood not as master and maid, but as two souls who had finally found what all their worlds had denied them: truth.